Hello and welcome to this video about authoring and leveraging Arazzo API specifications for OpenAPI and AsyncAPI workflow testing. Let's say we have a backend for front-end application, a BFF, talking to location service and order service. It needs to make a series of synchronous as well as asynchronous API calls. To begin with, it gets the user location. Eventually, it gets the products available at that location. And then to create the order for that user, we asynchronously send messages over Kafka topic, and the order service also responds over another Kafka topic. And then ultimately, to get order details, we synchronously make one API call to get the order details. So how do we model this? In the previous video about Arazzo API specification and how we can use it with Specmatic, I would have demonstrated to you that we can author a workflow using OpenAPI specifications by dragging and dropping operations from the OpenAPI spec into a workflow. That's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to author a workflow. Let's try and, because this is quite an involved workflow, we're going to need some space. So let me make my space here. So that's a good enough box. And I have two API specifications, in fact, three API specifications, one asynchronous and a couple of synchronous API specifications for location service and order service. So just as described in the slide earlier when I showed you, I'd first need to get the user location using the get user details API call. Once I have done that, I need to get the products available at that location. So I'll sequence that next. Subsequently, to place the order with the available products, I'll pull an asynchronous operation into this mix. Subsequently, for the response that I am supposed to get from order service over Kafka topics, I will put this message in here. And eventually, I need to get order details. So let me put that as the last step here. And before I proceed, let me give this a name. Let's say place order is the workflow name. And just for following some conventions, let me say get order user details. Let me capitalize the start of it. Let me call this create order. And this is order confirmation. And this is get order. And once I've done that, I can simply connect these boxes to let Specmatic know that this is the sequence in which the API calls are supposed to happen. Yeah, there we go. I have connected it, and that's the basic setup. So now, obviously, I don't have to clean this up. I simply say auto layout, and it neatly summarizes what is the overall flow. But obviously, you need to go into the details of success and failure criteria. So I'll say generate workflow, and Specmatic will do the rest for you by creating all the possible paths, and you can trace it to see for each success criteria what happens and whatnot. Again, I'd refer you back to the previous video where I would have done a thorough walkthrough of how workflows have decision points and success criteria basis which various paths can be taken through the journey. So now, in the interest of time, I'll move forward. I'll quickly export an Arazzo API specification basis this workflow. And there you go. We have successfully exported the same. I am going to look for it in my package explorer here. And there you go. The order, place order workflow has been created. And as you can see, I again have a pictorial representation of the Arazzo API specification here. And on the right hand side is the actual Arazzo spec. More interesting part here, obviously, is the part that we have actually mixed in asynchronous operations along with synchronous operations. The asynchronous operation being the create order. As you can see here, this step involves creating an order with payload for that particular topic, a Kafka topic here, and then eventually you have a response order confirmation. And here it's a receive, it's a send and a receive. So asynchronous API operations have been pulled into an Arazzo API specification. So now I need to run this Arazzo API spec as a test. So which obviously I have the application already running here on my system, and it's alive on Docker. What I need to do now is just take the input data. I need test data for the system, right? So I have already have a sample input information here, which I'm going to paste it into here in the interest of time. This is the input data for the various journeys that are possible through the Arazzo API specification. I'll save this. As you can see, I have a default journey, which is a happy path, and a not so happy path journey where some use cases will not be met. So for example, here in the default journey, for this particular order request ID and the user information, we will have products at the available location, right? But for this user, the products will not be available at the location, and thereby the journey has to take an alternative route, which is the not so happy path. So let's quickly run the test. We'll analyze the details to understand the journey itself in greater detail. So I'm going to simply run the test here. And just like in the last video I had explained, how does it know all the URLs? Where is it running? So all of that information is directly taken from the API specifications, the respective API spec, be it OpenAPI or AsyncAPI using server URLs. We know where to point. So, and we already have a successful test that is completed. And I don't have to dive into the textual data. I have visual representation of how this test ran, right? I have this, again, beautiful diagram here, which shows me what is happening. And as you can see on the right, this is the default or the happy path journey that we are tracing. For this happy path, we started with placing the order where we got the user details. We did get a success at 2xx, and subsequently it was a non-empty array. Thereby, we moved forward, we pushed the message into Kafka. Then eventually we got a response from order service through another Kafka topic. Ultimately, we got the order details and went to the end. And if you would like to trace the path of the other not so happy path journey, I'll switch the example name itself, and you'll notice that here the array was empty for the products, and obviously we did not do any subsequent steps and directly went all the way to the end. So that is the two journeys. Again, you can dive into the details of this itself by going into the steps. You can look at the HTTP requests and the responses. Likewise, you can go into the create order, which is more interesting, which in this case is the asynchronous operation. You can see the payload that was sent over the Kafka topic, and subsequently you can also see on the order confirmation what is the response that was received for that particular order. With that, I'd quickly like to recap what we did. We started with simple OpenAPI and AsyncAPI specifications. We tracked those operations into a workflow authoring template visually. Once we did the drag and drop, we exported that drag and drop workflow visually, which we had created, into an Arazzo API specification. And then we took that Arazzo API specification and ran it as a workflow test against a running application to make sure that we are able to test the entire journey for that particular Arazzo API specification.